Okay.
And,
So where do you
and
like it then? That's the question.
you have to be aggressive. It's really good in an aggressive deck where you just drop it early, and if they don't have an answer, they're in a lot of trouble. And yeah, there's other cards that have been like that before that aren't that good. The difference is because Lunarch Mantle can gain flying, you can also it's also a pretty sick top deck really late in the game where it doesn't matter that you're sacking permanents, you just want to hit them for 5 in the air.
Yeah, and you're just punching through the last
It
chunks of
acts as a
damage.
very good finisher while having the ability to steal games early. The combination of those two is actually enough to make me get over the fact that it's an aura. Like I said, I don't think we're going to be first in line to be playing this card, but I have to respect its power.
I agree. That's where I'm at it too. I don't plan on playing it very much. I still don't think it's very good. I certainly don't think it's a high pick. I don't think it's a thing that you need to prioritize. Like, I think of it as kind of like a super combat trick, right? Like a very good combat trick that you would want to have in your deck, but that you don't need to go out. You're not like opening up a pack and you're like, oh, but man, there's a Lunarch Mantle here. I can't pass it. Like, you're like, no, it's okay. Pass it. It'll probably come back or you'll get one later. Uh, cards like that I don't have to prioritize. But the truth is, I agree with you. I do think that you can put it in some decks, especially if you're trying to beat down, but just don't put it in your slow or medium deck. I really feel like you can find a better slot for that. Almost any creature's better at that point. But, if you're looking to try to get in there early, also, one other word of note about Lunarch Mantle is be willing to side it out. If your opponent is playing a bunch of, drag unders and unsubstantiates and stuff, or even just cheap, other types of like choking restraints and stuff like that, just take it out. You don't need to take on all that extra risk just because, you started it off in your deck. It's fine to start it there if you want, but just be willing to sideboard it out if shown enough cards that it makes sense.
Yeah, I
You,
think
you,
it's a fine card.
One last point on it too, by the way, is I've heard a lot of people say, like they'll be like, put it on my 2/2, attack you for 4. Okay, I got in for 4. And then you're like, untap drag under. And they're like, okay, crap. And then, like I'll poke them on the shoulder and say, see, that card sucks. And they'll be like, well, it got me in for 4 damage. And it's like, okay, that is true. Like, my point isn't, okay, well, it's 0. Like the card isn't a complete 0, but that is not worth a card. No way that's worth a card, right? Like sorcery
No,
speed, pump spell or whatever. Like, not that that's the peak of it. It's just you should be very disappointed if you go Lunarch Mantle and your opponent goes Island Drag Under. You should be like, crap. This is really bad for me. I just spent a bunch of tempo and a card, and my opponent, equalized all of that out. That's really bad for you. Don't think, well, at least I got in for 4. Like, no, that's a disaster. And if it's going to be happening, you should certainly take it out.
ooh, I'll let you run point on the next one.
Yeah, I was already kind of stepping up on the on the soapbox. I may as well just stand full on it. Blood Mist. Man, I don't like this card, dude. I really don't. And this is a really interesting one. And the reason I wanted to talk about it was because the rankings on this, like I talked to a bunch of the pros, and it's all over the place. Some of the teams think it's bad and they don't like it. Some teams think it's pretty good. Some teams think it's great. Like, just like, oh no, it's very good. You always play it, that kind of thing. I am definitely down on this card. I do think that there's decks that want it. I just think that they don't come up very often. And what you want is the highest power level creatures you can get. Your Brazen Wolves are your absolute all-stars with this type of card. The difference between 3 and 4 is huge. The difference between 2 and 3 is huge. Also, you can play it if you've got a bunch of small evasive threats that are likely to get through in the air. I think that that's a good place for them as well, where you can pile on enough damage where it actually does change the racing. You're denying your opponent draw steps by closing out the game quicker. But in like your average red deck, your average mid-range deck, I really hate Blood Mist. And, the comparison that I've come up with for it, just as like a, ask yourself this question type of thing is, what if it was a 3/4 for 4? Vanilla.
Like just vanilla, right? It's your like,
Yeah.
what if on turn 4 or 5 or whenever you were casting Blood Mist, you just
Yeah.
played a 3/4?
Yeah, you just played a 3/4. And just run that exercise for me as you're playing against it and playing with it. And I think what you'll see is that when you're on offense, basically when you're the one who's beating down, Blood Mist can be better for sure. It's quicker. It also has a more unique effect that can be, that can pile on a lot of damage in sort of this hasty kind of way, and that counts. That is a plus side for Blood Mist. But I also think that playing a 3/4 on that same turn would often put you in a good, solid position to win the game if you were the beatdown as well. And the thing, of course, everybody knows what I'm going to say here is, what about when you're behind? What about when you're behind? You just don't get to plan out every game for being ahead. That's not how limited Magic works. Almost all the decks you draft are going to be some variation of a mid-range deck, and you will have mana problems or not draw enough creatures, or your opponent kills your first two things, or they 2-for-1 you, God forbid, with a Savage Alliance or something like that, and you're behind. You're the one who's taking hits of 4 each from a wolves, or 3 damage from from some 3-drop creature or whatever it is, and you draw or play Blood Mist and it's dead. It's completely dead. And now sub in the vanilla 3/4 for 4. Again, not a great card. Like, this isn't uncommon as well. It's just whatever, just a 3/4. And all of a sudden you're in a position where you can stabilize that board. You can find a way to get back into it. So that's my argument against Blood Mist. That's why I don't like it. That's why I don't think it's a great card. But I do recognize that there are some decks that want it, and I think it goes well in those decks, and I think you should play it in those. It's just they probably don't come up as often as most people that play it think.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm at Blood Mist compared to you. I'm probably not as down on it as you are, because
few are.
Well, one of the things that's important to look at is, yes, it is definitely bad when you're behind, and that is a valid reason to dislike it. It's not that it takes you from winning to winning more. That's not the important part, because it does do that, but a lot of cards do that, and your hypothetical 4-mana 3/4, whatever, Giant Ape or whatever would also do that.
Hypothetically.
But I think that the key games for Blood Mist are the games where your creature wouldn't be able to attack is a big part of it.
Yes.
Or it puts your opponent in a really bad spot where, like, instead of trading a creature, now they're either can't trade or have to trade 2 creatures.
Yes.
And there are decks where that'll happen a decent amount of the time. And Blood Mist,
yep,
it's not impossible to get a card out of it, a good percentage of the time you cast it. It uses one of those super scarce slots, though. This is where I think people get in the most trouble with cards like this. And, we both preached against them way before I came on the show, and I'm sure, in a couple weeks after I've left, then that...
What the hell,
man? Cards that aren't removal spells and aren't creatures, and in a lot of ways don't affect the board, you have like 0 to 2 slots for those cards. So
yeah, that's a great point.
And
well, and along that point, by the way, is making sure you have enough creatures, period.
Right. And and you have 0 slots when you only have 12 creatures.
Yeah.
When you have 18 creatures, you can play one of these cards.
Yeah.
So,
but like, you don't want to run this with equipment and pump spells and all this other stuff, right? Like, all of those are eating into the slots and further exacerbating the problem when your opponent does kill your creatures of, I've got this Blood Mist and this, cultist staff or whatever, and I don't have anything to put it on, Also, there's, repeatable removal, and anyway, I'll digress. I digress.
Yeah, basically, if you have a deck that has reasonably sized creatures and has room for a card that doesn't do either, isn't a removal spell or as a creature, then Blood Mist can be quite good.
Yeah, like, I like the werewolves. I like the 4-power creature.
With the werewolves.
Well, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Like, if you play Blood Mist and, you get like the 4/4 Trampler, the Vildenpack Outcast or whatever, I mean, that is a major issue for your opponent. It really is. And that is a powerful combination, being able to give that card, double strike, especially with Trample. So, and the ability to pump it. Yeah, it does have a few slots, but I like what you said. I think that, you're going to be able to find a spot for it sometimes, but like I said, probably not as often as you think. Now you have Ingenious Scob here. What do you have to say about him? Because he's great, right?
Ingenious Scob is great, and somehow I think people don't even realize the full extent of the greatness. Ingenious Scob is closer to it's probably closer to a 3-mana 4/5 than what a lot of people think it is. That's just absurd. So I just want to say you should take Ingenious Scob early and often, and in any blue deck, it's going to be a great card.
Yeah, I agree. That card is just fantastic. Laboratory Brute. Now, you I think made mention of this earlier, right? When we were talking about the Stensia Innkeeper.
Right. That's exactly what I was referring to, which is Laboratory Brute's a 4-mana 3/3 with what looks like just a very minor ability. I think it's slightly better than that. There's enough graveyard synergies going on that I'm not on. I thought Laboratory Brute would be one of those cards that I would be unhappy if I put in my deck. And it turns out I'm one of those cards I'm, well, closer to neutral on if I put in my deck. I found myself playing it more often than I thought I would. It just helps you get Delirium. It helps you mill cards like if you have, for example, a Grizzled Angler in your deck, or if you have any other card that cares about the graveyard at all, like especially in like blue-black, for example, even in blue-green because they have some Delirium cards.
Yeah,
like these are all
Spontaneous Mutation.
Spontaneous Mutation is a great combo with it too. Like it just does enough different things that I'm actually down to play Laboratory Brute. I would say more than half the time, which is more than I expected.
Mill Giant for life. I agree. It's come around for me. It has just enough synergies with everything. Yeah. Spontaneous Mutation.
Another card which I think people are starting to catch on to, but this is a very good removal spell. I've played against a lot of decks where it's like, oh, if they draw their Spontaneous Mutations, then I'm just gonna have so much trouble beating them. Like I've got these dorky 5-mana 4/4 type creatures, and even Building Pack Outcast, the red werewolf that flips into a 5/7, it can get colded by Spontaneous Mutation. Some blue black decks can get 12 cards in their graveyard.
Yeah, you can. I mean, going back to the effects like Blood Mist and Lunarch Mantle, you can do some work against those. It's not like permanent against Blood Mist, but you're going to blank their best creature, and oftentimes they don't have another great one. If they put Lunarch Mantle on their thing, and they're like, give it flying, sack a thing, attack, and you're like, sure, no problem. Spontaneous Mutation. It's just like, oh god, that's gross. And the cool part is that, at least in the decks that I've really been happy with it, emerge decks, that kind of thing, I've had enough late game stuff that I can just wait around and, put a bunch of mana into a werewolf or emerge something and then take over from there and not really care if they end up blocking at some point. It's not like that has ended up feeling like not a huge downside.
Yeah, it's just an efficient removal spell, and I think a lot of people look at it and just don't see it in that. Like, it doesn't look like a removal spell. This looks like one of those, kind of wacky blue enchantments that sometimes pop up.
Yeah, but it performs a lot more like a removal spell. I agree. What about Make Mischief? Another, kind of weird looking removal spell.
Yeah, deal 1, make a 1/1 devil. I found that there's enough 1 toughness creatures that this is a card I like having access to. I'm not saying I always main deck it because sometimes I'll just sideboard it instead. But when it's good, man, this card is so good.
I agree.
And I had a game where I discarded to hand size on turn 3. It was just mana screwed for like another turn after that. But ended up going Make Mischief, kill your 2/1 flyer, block your 2/1 ground creature. And it was just like, that actually got me back into the game. Like,
yeah.
The card has its moments, and you can get them pretty late. You can almost always pick up a Make Mischief, and I like having access to exactly one.
The way I like to think about it is similar to your example there, which is that ideally you can kill a 1 toughness creature and then be able to kill a 2 toughness ground creature with the devil, right? Like you kill their 2/1 flyer, they attack you with their 2/2, you block with the devil and then kill their creature. And that's powerful. And that doesn't always pop up that way, right? But if you can get either side of that, I think it's pretty good. Like, even if the first half just goes to the opponent's head and you're just like, take 1, make a devil, block your 2-drop, kill your 2-drop, that's fine, and then the occasional times when you get to actually kill a creature and then have the devil actually matter, right? Like really affect combat in a way. It's good. It holds its own. And then also, I find that especially in the blue-red spells deck, this is the kind of card you want. Like you need as many spells as you can get. And this one is kind of like half creature, half spell, for not really much of a discount, but you do what you got to do. And I think it's fine.
Cryptolith Fragment is the next card, and this is so kind cool. It's a very confused card.
Yes,
it's a 3-mana card that fixes for any color and ramps you, which says, okay, this sounds like a good card for a control deck, but it makes both players lose a life when you tap it, which is very much not what control decks want. And in fact, where I found this card to be much, much better is in beatdown decks. It drains your opponent for 1 every turn. You don't care a ton about the damage to yourself, and later in the game, when it can flip, it just becomes absurd.
Yes. I think this card's really cool, and it's proven pretty good for me, too.
Yeah, I think it's a real card, and just utilizing it correctly is important. Don't think this is going to be great in your control decks, though it is playable there. It is an actual aggro card.
What about Terrarion? It's a pretty unassuming little artifact that I think you can put in your deck or not, but have you found that you've been putting it in your deck often or less so?
I like Terrarion a lot. It does a lot of little minor things, kind of like Laboratory Brute. It just has enough little synergies that it does what I'm looking for. It enables Delirium and decks that care about that. It's another card in your graveyard for cards like Spontaneous Mutation. It also triggers Bloodbriar, which is something that I've found to be quite useful. Like if I have Bloodbriar in my deck, I'm just playing Terrarion.
Hmm.
Because the other thing is, most limited decks, your mana is not really great. I mean, even like the normal 10-7 or 9-8 configuration, like still pretty easy to draw 3 of one type and 0 of the other, and
Oh yeah.
Terrarion really helps with that.
Yeah, I like to look at how many double mana symbol cards I have as well. If I've got two or three, Sharion's kind of a no-brainer because it's just like you said. Sometimes even in that scenario, you can draw three of one of the other, and still not be able to cast one of those spells. And Terrarion is pretty light on the weight, right? It's not completely free because it does enter the battlefield tapped, so you kind of tie up a card in it basically for a turn cycle, but it just doesn't bite you quite often enough to make it so that you don't want to play it. And like you said, even with like a Bloodbriar, I'm quite happy to just run a Terrarion in my deck.
Yeah, the costs there, and there's two big costs here. One is that it comes into play tapped, so like you said, you have to wait a turn. The other is that you have to pay a mana, which yeah, when you're curving out is a real drawback. But the upsides you get from it are pretty big.
Yeah, I like it. Midnight Scavengers you have here.
This is one of the better black commons, which actually kind of just speaks more to where black is than where
Yeah.
Midnight Scavengers is, was something we're going to get to. But